Welcome to 11 Recaps. If you enjoy this summary, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. It really helps me keep bringing you engaging content. Ready for your support? Awesome, thank you. Let's dive in. The air was thin and cold, biting at Will's lungs as he stumbled out of the wrecked truck, the metallic tang of blood sharp on his tongue. His head throbbed from the crash, the world tilting as he dragged himself up the rocky incline toward the 8,000-foot line. Salvation just yards away. Behind him, the guttural roar of a reaper shredded the silence of the Colorado wilderness, its mechanical claws scraping the earth. He clutched the bag of breathing filters tight against his chest, the last hope for his son Hunter, whose fragile lungs depended on them. The hill steepened, his legs burned, and despair clawed at him as a second reaper loomed ahead, blocking his path. Its glowing eyes fixed on him, unyielding, a predator savoring the kill. Will's hand fumbled for his gun, fingers trembling as he fired useless rounds into the beast's armored hide. The bullets ricocheted off, a futile clatter against the monster's scales. His breath hitched, not just from the altitude but from the weight of memory, of Hunter's small, pale face, coughing in the dim light of their mountain refuge, and of his wife Sarah, who'd promised she'd return from her mission with Nina 3 years ago and never did. He'd lost her to these creatures, and now, it seemed, he'd lose himself too. The reapers closed in, its body convulsing as sparks danced across its scales. It collapsed, mechanical innards exposed in a tangle of wires and gears. Will blinked dazed as Nina emerged from the trees, her face streaked with dirt and tears, a rifle in her hands. She fired again, and the second reaper fell, its roar cut short by a burst of blue flame. She rushed to his side, breathless, holding up a jagged piece of the creature's body, metal glinting beneath the flesh. "They're machines," she rasped, voice raw with revelation. "Programmed to kill us. Not alive, not even real predators." Her eyes burned with a mix of triumph and guilt, a scientist who'd finally cracked the puzzle, but at a cost she couldn't unpay. Will stared at her, then at the filters still clutched in his shaking hands. Hunter. He'd made it for Hunter. The world steadied, the adrenaline fading into a dull ache, and he let Nina pull him to his feet. Together, they crossed the line into safety, the Reaper's mechanical corpses smoldering behind them. But as they trudged back toward Lost Gulch Refuge, a question gnawed at him. Who sent them? Nina's gaze flickered skyward, a shadow crossing her face, and Will knew she was wondering the same thing. That moment of survival wasn't where this story began, though it felt like the culmination of everything Will had fought for. It started days earlier, or years if you counted the slow unraveling of the world. 3 years ago, the sinkholes had torn open the earth, spewing fire and monsters that reduced humanity to a terrified remnant. The Reapers hunted relentlessly, immune to bullets, driving survivors to the high altitudes where the creatures inexplicably froze. In the Rockies, at 8,000 feet, Will had built a life for Hunter in Lost Gulch, a cluster of 193 souls clinging to hope. But life there was fragile, tethered to the machines that kept Hunter breathing, and to the memories Will couldn't escape. The night before he'd left for Boulder, Will had sat by Hunter's bedside, the boy's coughs echoing in the cramped cabin. The filter in the breathing machine hissed its last, and Will's hands shook as he swapped it out, the final one they had. Hunter's eyes, wide and trusting, met his. "You'll fix it, right, Dad?" he'd whispered, voice small against the hum of the machine. Will nodded, throat tight, unable to tell his son how close they were to running out of everything, filters, food, time. He'd stared at maps after Hunter drifted off, tracing routes below the safety line. Boulder, with its hospital and Nina's old lab, held the answers he needed. But crossing into Reaper territory was madness. A lesson burned into him the day Hunter had tried it himself. Will's mind flashed back to that afternoon, weeks earlier, when he'd found his son staggering back across the line, a Reaper's claws slashing the air inches behind him. "Hunter!" Will had roared, dragging the boy to safety, his heart hammering as the monster halted at the invisible boundary. Hunter had coughed, clutching his chest, and Will's anger had spilled over. "What were you thinking? You can't breathe down there, your lungs." "I just wanted to see," Hunter had mumbled, eyes downcast. "To find someone else. Mom said there were more people out there." Will's chest had tightened at the mention of Sarah. She'd been the dreamer, the one who believed they could fight back. Hunter's curiosity was hers too, but it was a dangerous inheritance. Later, when Will confided in Katie, their hunting partner, she'd offered a gentler perspective. "He's the only kid here, Will. He's lonely. And that place he ran to? It's where he last saw her. Katie's words had lingered, heavy with truth, but Will couldn't shake the fear that gripped him every time Hunter's cough worsened. Sarah had died chasing a solution with Nina, and now Will face the same choice. Stay safe and watch his son fade, or risk everything to save him. The decision crystallized on Hunter's birthday. Will had scavenged the community's last box of mac and cheese, a rare treat, and they'd cooked it together over a flickering stove. Hunter's smile, fleeting but real, had warmed the cabin. "Why don't we use the radio anymore?" he'd asked, stirring the pot with a wooden spoon too big for his hands. "Electricity's tight," Will had explained, keeping his tone light. "We use flags to talk to the other refuges now." Hunter frowned, a shadow crossing his young face. "That's sad. Talking's how you find people." Will had no answer, just a pang of guilt as Hunter coughed again, the sound rattling deep in his chest. That night, with no filters left, Will had injected him with the last of their emergency meds, watching the boy's breathing steady. It was a temporary fix, and Will knew it. He'd gone to Nina then, finding her in her workshop, surrounded by Reaper scales and failed experiments. Her latest test, a bullet fired into a piece of hide, had thudded uselessly to the floor. "I'm going to Boulder," he'd said, voice firm despite the dread curling in his gut. "For filters. There's a safe road through the mountains." Nina had scoffed, her sharp eyes narrowing. "Safe? I know that area better than you. There's no such thing." Her old lab was in Boulder, though, and Will pressed her to join him. "You've studied these things. You survived the last trip." "Barely," she'd snapped. And Sarah didn't. The name hung between them, a wound neither could heal. Will had pushed harder, mentioning a mine that tunneled through the peaks, but Nina's refusal was adamant. "Reapers in a confined space? That's a death trap." She'd turned back to her workbench, fiddling with a compass, but Will saw the tremor in her hands. Guilt she wouldn't voice. He'd left her there, resolve hardening. Katie had caught him at the gun store, loading up on weapons. "I'm coming," she declared, ignoring his protests. And Nina, after a sleepless night haunted by Sarah's memory, had relented too, joining them with a bitter jab at Katie. "She'll just slow us down." Saying goodbye to Hunter had been the hardest part. "I'll be back," Will had promised, kneeling by the boy's bed. Hunter's eyes, too wise for his years, had met his. "Mom said that too." The words cut deeper than any Reaper's claw, but Will forced a smile, leaving his son with a neighbor and stepping into the unknown. The journey had begun with tension thick as the mountain air. Nina's modified compass, rigged to detect the Reaper's bioelectromagnetic pulses, hummed in her hands as they crossed the 8,000-foot line on the Elba Fire Road. Katie trailed behind, her inexperience a constant barb in Nina's snide remarks. Will silenced them with a sharp enough, but the unease lingered. They'd found abandoned trucks early on, scavenging flares, ammo, and a grenade launcher Katie claimed she could handle. Nina had paused to collect a Reaper scale, her scientist's curiosity overriding caution, sparking a clash with Katie that erupted into fists. "You killed her," Katie had screamed, pinning Nina against a truck, her rage a mirror to Will's buried grief. He'd pulled them apart, the memory of Sarah's last mission, a failed bid to find a weapon against the Reapers, burning in his mind. The forest had offered a brief reprieve, wild horses grazing unbothered by the Reapers' presence. "They only hunt us," Nina had muttered, a chill threading her words. At Alta Vista ski area, they'd aimed to use the chairlift to reach the mines, but the compass had buzzed, trees shaking as a Reaper approached. Will had scrambled to activate the generators, Nina and Katie covering him from below. Katie's grenades had boomed, useless against the monster, and chaos had followed. Chairs swaying, cables snapping, a desperate leap as they fell to the ground and ran, barely crossing the line to safety. That night, holed up in the ski resort, Nina had shared a bleak truth over a shared drink. "They killed 95% of us. No eating, no resting, just slaughter. Predators kill to survive. Reapers kill for sport." Will had lain awake after, replaying Sarah's final words. "Trust Nina. She'll find a way." He'd clung to that faith, even as doubt gnawed at him. The mine had been their next gamble. Its ends sat above 8,000 feet, but the lower tunnels dipped below, a risk they couldn't avoid after a cave-in blocked the main path. Level 7 stretched dark and silent, their helmet lights cutting through the gloom. A Reaper had found them there, its glowing tail piercing the shadows. They'd run, Katie's grenades and Will's bullets buying time, until a frantic scramble through a hole in the wall led to tragedy. Katie, impaled by the monster's tail, had been dragged away before Will could reach her, her screams echoing as he and Nina climbed to safety. Exhausted, they'd stumbled into an abandoned house, sharing mac and cheese that reminded Will of Hunter. Nina had revealed her lab's goal: a chemical to make bullets pierce the Reaper's scales, triggering internal combustion. Will had scoffed, a magic bullet? But the flicker of hope in her eyes had echoed Sarah's determination. The hospital in Boulder had yielded the filters, but a Reaper's ambush had nearly ended them. Nina's axe and Will's quick thinking, blasting oxygen tanks to hurl the creature through a window, had bought them time. She'd convinced him to detour to her lab, where she'd mixed chemicals while Will found a photo of her lost family, a son and husband she'd failed to save. Her confession had spilled out raw and broken. "I wasn't there when it started. And Sarah, I led her to her death. Her first bullets had failed, and she'd urged Will to go. He'd left, only to crash the truck, bringing the story full circle to that desperate chase up the hill." Nina's arrival, her successful bullets sparking victory, had rewritten the ending. Back at Lost Gulch, Will had embraced Hunter, the filters securing his son's breath, while Nina raised a pirate flag, a signal of defiance and hope. The radio crackled to life, broadcasting their triumph, and survivors armed with Nina's bullets marched into the forest, reclaiming the land from the Reaper's reign. One night, weeks later, Will and Nina stood on a ridge, a telescope trained on the sky. 3 lights pulsed in the distance, too steady to be stars, drifting closer to Earth. Nina's hand tightened on the scope, her voice a whisper. "Whoever sent them, they're not done." Will thought of Hunter, of Sarah, and of the fight ahead. The Reapers were machines, but the war, it seemed, was just beginning.